Hey everyone, welcome back to the next segment of the First Gen Psychologist. I'm Dr. Lisa and I'm the First Gen Psychologist. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am a licensed psychologist, a coach, a speaker, a writer, and today I am your host. Today I will be talking to you all about a really important topic. But before I get into that, let me just share with you a little bit more about the purpose behind this series. So the purpose behind this series is to cover topics that destigmatize mental health, as well as topics for personal development and empowerment centered on the first gen experience. So today's topic is building bridges in mother-daughter relationships as a first gen. And we'll be speaking with someone really special, and her name is Lupe Nambo-Basua. She's a Latina psychotherapist, and let me share a little bit more about her. So Lupe Nambo-Basua, she's a bilingual Latina psychotherapist, a proud daughter of immigrants with a passion for supporting BIPOC and breaking generational cycles of trauma and building healthier generations. Lupe strives to create sustainable mental health practices, intentionally inviting conversations that explore barriers and systemic inequities in marginalized communities, and empowering communities to reclaim their mental health and live their lives as their authentic selves. So I could feel Lupe believes in radical vulnerability and is breaking the stigma in the Latinx community around sensitivity. She's a proud chillona, me too, and is always down to cry and feel it out. So Lupe, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. How are you?
Bien. Thank you, everyone, for this plática that we're about to get into, and Dr. Lisette for inviting me to be a part of this and to be in community with her. I'm excited. I feel great. I feel energized, and I'm ready. I'm ready for this conversation and kind of see where we go with it.
All right. So remember, building bridges in mother-daughter relationships is the first gen. When you suggested this topic, I was so excited because this is something that comes up so frequently in my work, in my individual therapy. And so I imagine, I'm not in a bubble. All of us therapists specialize in first gen. This happens often. And we've experienced, or I'll speak for myself. I know I've experienced some challenging dynamics myself, and can assume, but you're nodding. Yeah. So let's just get started with understanding some common challenges that may arise in some of these mother-daughter relationships as we're thinking about these first-gen immigrant families.
Yeah, well, first, I think it's important to honor that all of our experiences with our moms look different. And so I think today is like the intentional of like just putting things out there. I think some things may relate, some may not. And I think also how complex this conversation is that we probably won't get to cover everything, but at least we can shed light. And I think a lot of the common challenges are the different cultures that kind of come into the family system, right? So you have multi-generational families, including your parents and your mom, who comes potentially what their migration story is. They come to this country, and so there's a lot that comes with that, right? So there's culture, there's machismo, there's patriarchy, there's expectations, there's also forms of oppression, I think, that our mothers have experienced. And then when we are born in this culture in the US, it's almost like we're our mother's wildest dreams, but we're also their biggest threat at the same time, because everything they've ever known about potentially womanhood and motherhood existed in this bubble within their culture. And the US is so threatening, and it can be invasive and so differently. And so a lot of the times it feels like we're constantly fighting with our mothers, but at the same time, they're also fighting for us, right? Every single day. And so it just feels so like a point of contention that there's so much there. And there's a lot of love and there's so many things there, but there's a barrier and like we don't know how to express it. Right.
Yeah, so in that it's holding both. It's holding, I feel that this person is fighting for me, but I also feel oppressed by this person at times or by their actions.
Yes. And I think both things about our moms or like our mommies, like, is true. Like, I can love this person so much and they've caused harm knowingly and unknowingly. And I think that sometimes it's a really hard thing to sit with, because I think culturally too, like creemos, we grow up with this belief. It's like, oh, it's your mom. Like you have to love her, you have to care for you. All of these expectations of what it should like. But then there's never that opportunity for that accountability and for like that repair, those healing, restorative conversations of like, mommy, when you did this, this happened and this hurt me. And I understand where you were coming from, but that doesn't also negate the fact that it still caused harm. And I think those are really uncomfortable, scary type of conversations and emotions to sit with at the same time.
Yeah. And you know what I think of as you were sharing that is that you said, oh, there's these expectations of what the relationship should be. And these expectations, think about how they're formed, right? I think of when I was younger, I used to love watching this show called The Gilmore Girls. And I used to
girl.
I will say that young me really enjoyed the show. I identified with Rory in many ways. And or the character who played Rory. So, but as an adult, I remember rewatching it and identifying with the mom, and then being like, "Wow, that kid's kind of a brat."
Yeah.
And so but I share this to share our perspective. I could watch the same show multiple times and it gives us different perspective. But the perspective that it gave me, at least when I was a kid, was like, oh, my mom is supposed to be my best friend. I should be able to tell her everything. She should be welcoming and open to all of it. But that wasn't my reality. And so then that created that dissonance because it was confusing. Like, wait, but isn't this what all relationships are supposed to be like? And what suddenly makes you think like, what's wrong with me? Right?
Yeah. And I think it leads to, I think the one honoring that there wasn't a lot of representation on what like Latina moms look like in TV until recently, right? And so we kind of start seeing these dynamics. And I think when we're young and we're teenagers, we're angry, right? Because both parties are being misunderstood. Your mom's misunderstood and you're misunderstood. You're like, see me, understand me, know that I'm different. And your mom doesn't know what to do with that, right? Because potentially she was a mother that was never taught how to be in tune with her own needs and how to ask for help or how to speak up or how to have a voice. And so then when your child can do these things, it's really uncomfortable. And then it's kind of labeled like rebellious, like malcriada, no haces caso, like you're ungrateful. And it's more of this parent being like, I don't know how to teach you these things. And you're almost wiser than me in other ways. And it's also challenging because as a mother, if you've never learned these things and you can't teach it to your daughter, then your relationship potentially looks like your child trying to guess your emotions and keep you happy, right? And that can get kind of manipulative, right? And kind of taking advantage of your children and the guilt. And then you don't realize that now that's a generational thing that your daughter is going to grow up and also not being able to express emotions and say what they need and ask for help because it's being modeled and it's kind of carrying through these generations. So they're both not able to understand each other.
Yeah. So common challenges would be the expectations that we have around the relationships, both from the parent and the child. Expectations of how things should be, and then needing to understand that it's not necessarily like that. But those expectations come from the ways that people were taught before us, our ancestors, the generations before, and certain expectations. And then you're bringing in a whole new experience to the mix when you immigrate to another country with different cultural values, different expectations. And so that bicultural identity of the child who's raised here, and then the bicultural identity is developed for the person who immigrates here and then starts to spend time here and assimilate or acculturate as whichever fits for them. And so something that I can hear us sort of leaning into right now in terms of here's some of the challenges, some of what could create some conflict for folks. But let's talk about what maybe some consejos you might have for navigating some of these cultural differences or generational gaps between mothers and daughters.
Yeah, I think one is like deciding like what you are wanting that relationship to look like, right? Because I think everybody has a line of what do I want my relationship to look like with my mom, and like how close do we want to be, X, Y, and Z. So I think kind of figuring out what feels the healthiest for you. And I think also normalizing that kind of like, I think wherever you can fill the gaps to understand like your parents' history kind of helps you understand how they're navigating the world, and then how it kind of transfers onto you or projects onto you. Because I think, imagine leaving your country and leaving everything and family and friends, and all you have is your partner, and then you have children, and then the mother's like, and you want me, she comes to this country with, with nothing, and then it's like, and you want me to now lose my children, right? Because in a way, once their children start to assimilate and be part of the US culture, there's this fear of like, I'm losing my children, I'm feeling disconnected. So I'm now losing everything that I've ever loved and had. And so I think it's being able to understand, like, one, that it's so complex and that your mom is navigating so many different things. And so the biggest thing is like, how do we communicate? How do we label these things? How can we be in a space to say both of these things are true? Like, mom, like, I understand. Like, an example that I think about is like when your mom comes on, like, ay, nadie me ayuda en esta casa, nadie limpia in this and this and that, right? And being able to label, hey, mom, what I'm hearing is that you need some help. Like, I can help you. It's okay to ask us for help. And I think it might be uncomfortable because that's not language we normally use. But I also think our parents kind of stop and think, because there's something they're communicating and they don't know how to label it. And so I think, is that something we want to take on, right? Because sometimes you might be the child that's like, I don't want to take that on. And other times you might say, you know what? I think it's important for me to label and to speak it out loud, to model for my mom, Ama, we don't have to live like this. We can ask for help. We can change some dynamics in our home.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up that example, because I think it's a really common one, especially in Latinx families. That like, I remember hearing it constantly in different spaces, like, no one's helping me out, like, I'm not a maid, and kind of hearing these comments. And I remember asking, like, I didn't know you needed help. I didn't realize, because I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I communicate this? And the answer being, well, you should know. You should know. You should know. You should see me, and you should just intuitively know. And as a kid, I tried to push back. I was like, I can't read your mind, Mom. Like, I don't know. And that wasn't, she couldn't hear that. She couldn't hear that, because instead all she heard was like, you're not listening to me. And so that mismatch in communication. So within the consejos, I think one is getting clarity around sort of what capacity do you have in terms of, as an individual, for wanting to, like, how it would like bring some peace more to the relationship, connect more, maybe that's the word I'm looking for, within that. And so where's your capacity, what you can offer, because then that will shape the kind of responses you give.
Yeah. And I think in the moment, if it's too triggering, take a break. Like, don't feel this need to respond, because I think then that's when like the screaming matches happen. Like when our mom's like, oh, es que you should just know, debes saber lo que ocupo, right? And just being like, okay, mom, like, I'm really sorry that you didn't feel supported, that you didn't feel hurt. And I think also being cautious, because sometimes it doesn't warrant an apology, right? It could be like, I didn't know you felt that way. Like in the future, right? Or in the moment, if you're feeling triggered, just being like, okay, Emma, and like, you go do what you have to do, take a minute. And then when you notice that your mom's in a calmer place, then you can back out and say, hey, let's have that conversation. Like, Mom, I know you got really upset because you wanted us to just know that you need help, but can you help me understand like what you're needing from us? Like, do you want us to just by 10 a.m. have the kitchen cleaned or the garbage taken out, right? Because I think with our mommies too, it's like on time. Like, they have a whole schedule in their head that they did not share with us.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, I didn't know you wanted this done by 10, because then they're in chinga like all the time. Right. So it's like, okay, I don't know, I don't work that way. And so how do we live in community and harmony together and understand that we are different and we do things differently?
Exactly. So that taking one, clarifying expectations, two, recognizing your capacity, and then within that, recognizing your capacity in the moment. Maybe in that moment your capacity isn't there, but perhaps you just need a pause. And so take the pause and come back when you feel more clear-minded. In my sessions, I always refer to these, and I heard this originally on Hidden Brain, and I loved it. So I'm not taking credit for this, where they refer to the states as hot or cold states. Right? You're in a hot state, you're activated. That could mean excited and really happy as well, not necessarily upset, but you're just activated. When you're really activated, you're not thinking as clearly as when you've calmed down from it. And you're in a cold state, which essentially talks about how the hormones in your body have balanced out a little bit.
Yeah.
Are experiencing less of that stress hormone, cortisol, less of any other, stressful, somatic experiences you might be having. Your heart
Mhm.
rate maybe has slowed down. Maybe have released some of that tension. That is a cool state. That is the best time to then approach the conversation. Because you might start feeling hot again. So
Yeah. And normalizing another consejo is like, it takes
yeah,
time to
yeah,
repair or to restore a relationship, especially when if it's always been like kind of argument and tension and that's all you ever know. It's
yeah.
also really hard for the body to trust that it's going to change.
Hmm. Yeah, it's only known things to be a certain way. So yes, it takes time. That this is the only way maybe you've ever known the relationship, however
Mhm.
long that's been, and you're trying to approach it differently. It's not going to happen overnight. So thank you for normalizing that. I have one maybe a bit more specific question.
Yeah.
We're just thinking if there's any strategies, and I think we talked around this a little bit. Strategies for building trust and understanding between mothers and daughters in first generation immigrant families. We talked about it in terms of being patient, understanding yourself. I loved the way you phrased, taking that break, coming back to it. Can you share more about what you had in mind for this? And so, do you have any more like strategies that you would share with your clients or?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think too, like I think it depends if the individual's in a place to seek therapy, right? I think
Yeah.
when they come to us, it's like their space to them kind of externalize their family and family expectations and then maybe recenter themselves of like, what are my needs? How do I want to relate to my family? How do I want to exist in my family? What do I want my role to be in my family? Because sometimes we come not only as first gens, but sometimes we're the eldest, we're the middle child, we're the last child. And so we already come in with these expectations and belief of who we are in the family system. And I think it's also, we don't live in this black and white culture where it's like, oh, I'm done with my family, I'm going to cut him off. Like that's not always healing or safe for the person because sometimes, that's not how it looks for everybody. And you do want a relationship with your family. And so what would a safe and trusting relationship look like? Right. So I think if you can identify it first, and even if you don't know how to identify it, that's a lot of insight too of like, well, what doesn't feel safe? And where
Yeah.
do you feel like the biggest misunderstanding comes? Because I think until you can kind of start to learn and know yourself, it's going to be hard on what you want, what you're expecting of other people if you're not really sure what you need first.
Exactly. So there's a theme here throughout our conversation. A big part of it is self-awareness
Yes.
and cultivating self-awareness. And I love that you bring up therapy. Therapy is a wonderful tool for cultivating that self-awareness. I'm also always a big fan of journaling.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to jump over here and having any kind of community or support. And so I'm sure you agree with me. It's like, again, we live in a society where we are constantly interacting with others, and these people that we keep close to us, they are our system of support. And
Mm-hmm.
when we don't learn how to necessarily utilize them, it can be hard to lean into those, right? And so I want to just highlight, why this is important. It's not just, we don't just tell you all to, hey, let's enhance your social support system, so
Yeah.
that you know these people are there. We do have to reach out to them and utilize them. So let's talk about why this helps. So what role can community support and mentorship play in helping first-gen immigrants build stronger mother-daughter relationships?
Yeah. Well, one, I think community is, I'm always for community. It's so important. And community makes your growth and your progress sustainable, right? Because you have support systems that it doesn't fall on you. And I think historically, like ancestrally, community is kind of what got us through and helped us build like successful like empires and take care of each other and have resources and access. And so I think even within mental health, like we have to learn to draw on some of those strengths of like, where can I incorporate community to support me? And I think for like mother-daughter relationships, I think even too, if there's elders, older women in your life that are kind of more open to learning and healing and therapy, they're great support systems to bring in to kind of create a bridge between you and your mom of like, hey, these are support systems that are my mom's age that can maybe understand my mom in a way that I don't. How can we incorporate some pláticas and have like tias and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And like also like maybe being a little sneaky like in the holidays, like all your tias are around and like bringing out some conversations, like one being ready and emotionally ready for some of these conversations, but maybe if they're not too intense or you're like, okay, this is going to be traumatic. But if you can bring in little questions and kind of drop little breadcrumbs for your mom and tias to engage in some conversations around topics like this, like maybe boundaries or what they thought their relationships were going to look like with their daughters and how it's different. Because I think there's community in sharing your narrative, your story, and your experiences, right? There's so much strength in that. And I think that's also how people learn. And there's consejos that get shared between each other. And sometimes it plants those seeds of, not sometimes, but I think a lot of times those seeds of like being inspired or curious or maybe wanting to do, to change some things.
Yeah, I love that you bring up, I know you say like in terms of being like sneaky, it's like, oh, maybe be like, hey, like what do you all think about this? But what I find in terms of something that's happened for me personally is a behavior that I learned was seeking permission for certain things. Like I felt like I couldn't have certain conversations or I couldn't engage because I was raised and socialized to ask for permission for so much. And that was something that I still struggle with at times, reminding myself, like, oh, this is you get to do this. You don't have to ask anyone. You don't need anyone's permission. It's okay. But, the Monday, like, it's so ingrained in me that I'm like, am I okay doing this? Am I going to get in trouble doing this? Like, and with that, it's when you engage folks in these different conversations, it helps them understand that like, it's okay to talk about this, whether or not they're realizing that they were waiting for permission to talk about it. That might be something they're experiencing as well. Again, in society, when you're socialized to follow the rules, calladita te ves más bonita, right? Like there's an expectation that we're not necessarily voicing what's in our hearts all the time. And in those moments, that creates a safe space where people can check in and say like, oh, have you ever thought about this, right? And so one, it opens up their mind to the possibility that this is something that is okay to talk about, right? For the parent, for the mother in this scenario, and for the individual, same, talking to your peers, like, I'm not alone in this. That's what that's why community is so powerful. It reminds us that we're not alone, that we don't have to do it alone. And we are always so much more powerful as a collective. And so, yeah, I think we could talk about this so much more, but this is why these are brief. And I think we saw some amazing, I learned so many amazing things from you, Lupe. And in thinking about people who may want to work with you after this, I would love to learn more about how we can support you and your work.
Yeah, so my website's there, Luna Counseling, and that's if you want to learn more or if this has kind of planted any seeds in folks that want to do their own work and kind of do some healing or even just exploring, you can visit the website. You can also check me out on Instagram. And most of all, just thank you all for being open to this conversation, and maybe it planted some seeds or just give you insight on some areas and where you can start in kind of building these bridges with your mom.
Thank you so much again, Lupe. It was such a pleasure to have you here and to share a little bit of your expertise. These are really big conversations. And so if this is something that, as you heard us talk, you're like, I can relate to this, I can connect to this in any way, I encourage you to reach out to either of us. Or, if you have someone who you feel safe with already, start having that conversation. Start talking to others so you can feel less alone in that. And so again, thank you so much, everyone. And tune in for the next one. So remember, live episodes go live Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.